Tomorrow, boys, it's over. You'll no longer be able to watch the full podcast on our YouTube. So you'll have to subscribe to our Patreon, where all of the podcasts will be published going forward. We also have some exciting news, which is the first of our live events has been announced, and tickets will be available tomorrow morning. That's Friday, the 4th of July at 9 a.m. If you are a paid subscriber to the Patreon, you'll get a little notification in your inbox, and it will be available there as a post. The tickets are free. It is going to be a pub lock-in, so you'll be able to see a live podcast recording between myself, Ed and Ollie. Sean and Laura will also be there, and some other couple of fan favourites from PoliticsJOE, and we'll even stay for a few hours afterwards to share pints and chat amongst you all wonderful PolJOE heads. But the only way to see this podcast recording is to attend the event. It's going to be Chatham House rules. You can ask us anything, but that means there will not be a record. And we're going to do a series of these. So these are going to be repeated formats over the next few months. So if you want to come along, you're going to have to subscribe. Go to patreon.com/politicsjoe, and if you enter the code pod, that's POD pod, you'll have 90% off your first month, which is great because that means you can also come and see us for free. How exciting. And I know that some of you are very upset about that, and I'm really sorry that it is going behind a paywall. However, we would like to continue to deliver our journalism to you, and the only way we can do that is to fund it and finance it. So if you'd like to continue supporting us, you'll find the full podcast there. We will still be posting clips of our journalism across all socials, so you will be able to get a snippet of us. And there's also a new hardship tier. So if you are underemployed, if you are in receipt of universal credit, if you simply can't afford it, then the option is there for you to subscribe for a discounted rate. Thanks. Okay, love podcasts, hate nonsense.
It's the PoliticsJOE
podcast. So we are going to talk about the documentary that was released on Channel 4 last night at 10 o'clock. It was the Gaza Doctors Under Fire. Is that the
Doctors Under Attack.
Doctors Under Attack. Apologies. Which is on Channel 4. It was created by and put together by an independent publishing firm, independent documentary company. It was originally made, with the view of it appearing on the BBC. The BBC sort of dragged its heels for a few months and eventually concluded that it would not be publishing the documentary. Channel 4 bought it, and they have published it. And we watched it this morning.
We did. Probably not the best way to start the morning. It's kind of
No, but you could make the argument, couldn't you, that it's not the best way to start a morning to be in Gaza right now.
No, probably not. Probably not. We should say as well that the BBC gave a reason why they decided not to air it. And their reasoning for... I guess there was also the criticism when it was released on Channel 4 yesterday, wasn't it? That it begs the question as to why the BBC thought it wasn't appropriate to air. But what they said was that it would be...
Shall I do the statement?
Yes.
So in a statement, the BBC said it had paused production of Gaza, Doctors Under Attack in April, having made a decision that it could not broadcast the film while a review into a separate Gaza documentary was ongoing. Now, if you remember, that was the documentary that was, it was a citizen journalism piece. And I believe one of the sort of the main documentarians, his father, his relation was in Hamas.
Yeah, the 14-year-old narrator, their father was in Hamas.
Yeah. BBC statement said it had for some weeks been working with Basement Films, which is the production company, to find a way to tell the stories of these doctors on our platforms, and it became apparent we have reached the end of the road with these discussions. We have come to the conclusion that broadcasting this material risked creating a perception of partiality that would not meet the high standards that the public rightly expect of the BBC. I'm just going to continue just to finish off. Impartiality is a core principle of BBC News. It is one of the reasons we are the world's most trusted broadcaster. Therefore, we are transferring ownership of the film material to Basement Films. Contrary to some reports, since we paused production of Gaza Doctors Under Attack in April, it has not undergone the BBC's final pre-broadcast sign-off processes. Any film broadcast will not be a BBC film. We want to thank the doctors and contributors, and we are sorry we could not tell their stories. The BBC will continue to cover events in Gaza impartially.
Perception of partiality.
It's a real tricky phrase, that.
Yeah. Anything the BBC publishes can have a perception of partiality. It depends on who the perception is coming from. So I wonder why this particular thing, and also at the beginning of that statement, they mention the previous documentary. Why do the two things have to be taken together rather than as separate pieces of journalism?
Yeah.
Having watched it,
well, can we draw back a little bit? Can we just stick on the BBC for one moment? We obviously don't know we don't know the conversations. We can only hypothesize. I think I was talking about this on the Patreon earlier on the chat, and I was like, my very generous assumption would be it's something on the lines of this is a very generous assumption.
Yeah.
Just to put that in context. Because you are not allowed into Gaza as a journalist without the assistance of the IDF, you are not able to independently verify the footage that you are receiving. It is coming from a third party, who's someone who is not necessarily an employee of the corporation. You had a lot of caveats in the Channel 4 narration where they would tell you, we're not entirely sure if there are, say, doctors in the image we're showing you right now. We think they are. I would hazard a guess that likely means that there is, but you wouldn't be able to meet the editorial standards that perhaps another piece of footage that you had personally shot, right? You would have like more information and more of an insight. So my generous take is that perhaps the BBC panicked that they couldn't second and third source individual bits of footage, and perhaps they would have to gut the documentary and rework a lot of it, which would have meant that a lot of the impact would have been lost.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you're referencing there is the black sites part of the documentary where they talk about, So in the documentary, there's maybe 10-15 minutes that the documentary makers take photographs and videos of Gaza City in December 2023, where the IDF had rounded up mainly adult men, stripped them, blindfolded them, and handcuffed them. And it was basically a site where it's claimed extrajudicial justice can be taking place. In the documentary, they say it is believed that in these scenes there are some medical staff and some doctors. If the BBC were concerned about that bit in general, there could probably be a conversation of, will we remove this, seeing as the rest of the documentary is following the personal stories of first-hand accounts of doctors that we can verify.
The black sites feel so integral to that documentary. It feels so important to know about those.
It's certainly important, but I think when the documentary itself is just documenting the experience of medical staff, and you have got medical staff that you've spoken to, and you've got first-hand accounts and proof that they are medical staff and proof that they are employees in hospitals, you could maybe sacrifice the black sites aspect of it. As egregious and heinous and evil as the existence of these things are, if that was the be all and end all for the BBC, but it doesn't seem to be, because
I don't think I agree with you, because I think if you took that out in line with an editorial decision that you couldn't verify, then that would also call into question the reports that you get, or the first-hand accounts you get of the torture that the doctors say that they received while being detained by Israeli forces. But you could say that that shouldn't be in there either, because you could make an argument, well, that's he said, she said too. Do you know what I mean? That's that's we're just trusting this one person who claims they had this horrific thing done to them.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like it's a whole kettle of fish, right? Because you.
But I guess we're talking a lot about black sites now, but in that part, there's one doctor that they speak to about a separate black site, Dr. Hamuda, who is in a photo from a black site that the IDF had been using in Gaza. And the documentary maker is speaking to him and saying, point me out where you are.
Yes,
this.
yes,
And
yes.
it's like, here I am. This is what happened. Then I was taken to Israel, which is illegal under international law. You can't be transported over borders without trial, but it's kidnapping. That, yes, okay, it's he said, she said, but that's a first-hand account of a first-hand experience of that environment. Whereas with the rest of the black sites part, it's an interview with an Amnesty International employee in the West Bank that's saying, I've investigated these things and we think that there are medical staff in there.
She's identified 4 sites, hasn't she? And
Yeah.
she's saying that she thinks it's sort of like, I think she said tip of the horror or something like that, wasn't it?
I've got it there. A drop in an ocean of horror.
Yeah, that was a really quite arresting phrase, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But
yeah, if you take a best faith that something like that is the reason why they felt that their editorial standards would not be met by a film like that, it doesn't sit that well with me. That is the only reason that they decided not.
No,
to show
I'm not
it,
saying any of it sits well with me. I'm just I'm sort of trying to offer, because I think that especially like our audience, I think that they'll be rightfully angry that the BBC didn't publish it, because I would say that the corporation does have has a responsibility to publish something like that. You know, the footage was so graphic. It was awful. I mean, I think we all felt physically sick after we'd finished that, and I think we had to watch it in 3 stages because it was just it's awful. But what is a public service broadcaster if not showing you the horrors of, you know,
because I mean,
of war like that? You know, but I think that once they started closing one door, like, well, maybe we can't show this, then it becomes a groupthink exercise where everyone just sort of gets overly hysterical about what can and can't be shown.
Are you just going to anything that is in any way perceived as risky? It's just not going to be shown on the BBC anymore.
That's the thing. And I mean, that's again because it's the Bob Villain stuff all over again. You know, they've just put out a statement just before we came to sit here to record the podcast that they won't be showing these, like, quote unquote, what they would deem high risk performances live anymore. And I just don't think, I think we just got to be so careful because anything can be deemed high risk. That is so subjective. You know, you could have, for example, when you go to film a press conference, when you go to film an outside broadcast anywhere, a member of the public, a voter, a constituent, the risk is always going to be that someone might leap into on air and say something catastrophic that would violate your Ofcom license. But you have live defense.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And like, so I worry about where's the bar moving with what can and can't be shown. You know, all of the footage that we saw in that documentary has actually been readily available. Most of it has been readily available on social media. Exactly.
That's what I was about to say. A lot of the stuff that's in it, we've known already.
Yeah, we've seen.
Like there's 2 doctors.
But it's the job of a journalist, the job of a corporation to validate it, to stamp it and say, yeah, we checked it. That's real.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. This is a doctor that's done this route. This is what's happened to them.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, it's at the end of it as well, when you see the, it's just so brazen that I'm getting outside of the BBC now for a second, but what really struck me after watching an hour of these harrowing scenes and just evil conduct by the IDF and the Israeli government, to then see at the very, very end this statement from the IDF that said, we act in full accordance with international law and outright reject the allegation of deliberately targeting medical facilities and medical personnel. Throughout the documentary, there's footage of tanks pointed directly at hospitals.
But the thing is, that statement, that's the whole reason you can run pieces like this, because you say, here is what we've seen.
This is the counterpoint.
Yes.
This is the counterpoint.
That's the impartiality.
Yes, it's impartial. We've asked
Here's
for the
statement.
comment.
Yes.
Exactly. And I mean,
but they were refusing to comment on a number of things, weren't they? The narrator would. I think there was at least 2 occasions I can think of where they were like, "We asked for a statement on this." They didn't reply.
Yeah.
You know,
specific cases of people being.
But all you have to do as a journalist is ask. You can still publish it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just have to give them the correct amount. You know, a fair amount of time to reply.
It is that, and I mean. You were talking about Bob Villan there, but you've also got either last night or this morning over 100 BBC journalists signing a letter saying that they're concerned about the corporation's coverage of the attacks in Gaza by the IDF and how it seems to be skewed and not being appropriately covered and being kind of too cautious about coverage and refusing to truly engage with what's happening. I think it was like over 100 journalists at the BBC, and specifically taking aim at a particular member of the board of the BBC as well. I think head of news or something. But you compound that letter with this being published on Channel 4 yesterday, and then the Bob Villan stuff and the kneecap stuff the week before. There's just so much happening with how the corporation is deciding what is and what isn't.
The decisions are poor.
They're so poor.
They're poor.
Like what?
And they're unclear, and they're not structured, and they're not anywhere near that. There's no cohesion, or like, you know, that there's no. It doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason. There's not a one rule fits all.
Yeah.
For deciding on these, you know, I don't know. I think that a lot of. You watch something as horrific as the footage that was presented in that documentary, and I think a lot of people at the moment feel like they're going mad because you watch something like that, and then on the other side of it, you've got this policing of language that's happening in the UK. The thought process at the moment for, I would say, most people, and let's just be careful, in my echo chamber, fine, is I'm watching this absolutely horrific footage that I've seen for 18 months solid now. I'm being told that my language is too violent, but I've just watched the most violent scene imaginable. You wouldn't see this in the sort of dystopian horror film, you know, because it's that awful.
Yeah.
And so the sort of, it almost feels like gaslighting, because you're being told you need to be careful of your language.
Yeah.
Don't be careful.
I think that's the thing. I think there's been numerous polls out now over the last couple of months and years even, that I think by the beginning of this year, the end of last year, it was fairly consistent across all polling that the British public is now pro-Palestine or sympathetic to what is happening in Palestine, or believes that there should be a ceasefire and an end to the conflict, and believes that Israel is conducting an oppressive war against the Palestinian people of Gaza and in the West Bank as well. And I agree with you that there is this kind of, I think I said it to you at the beginning of all this, that, well, the beginning of, since October 2023, it felt really weird being Irish here, because it felt like your impression of what's happening in Palestine was so different to what particularly the media in Britain.
You will definitely do report it differently to the way that it is reported here.
Yeah.
But
it's been part of news in Ireland for decades, you know.
But it's not to say that there wasn't there was an outpouring
Exactly.
of sympathy.
That's
can I
what
say
I'm
there was
saying.
but there was an outpouring of sympathy because what happened on October the 7th was so horrific. But this isn't a competition of what, who can, like, which side is more horrific. Da, 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 da.
Yep.
The point is, it's a year and a half later, and people are looking at this and they're saying, we do not want to be complicit in the warfare that we're witnessing.
Yep.
Unfold in Gaza, and the government are simply not listening. But I want to pull it back a little bit because because we really are talking about journalistic standards here, and we're talking about why why it shouldn't have been, why it was published. The point that what the documentary did well, and this is the sort of it painted a very clear picture. So it didn't shy away from when you had a doctor, you would watch the most horrific story about this doctor, and it was told through sort of citizen journalism filming, and they would say, this doctor, his relation was in Hamas. He did express sympathy for the attacks on October 7th because that puts everything in context. It puts everything on the table. It puts everything like plain to see. What I think people get angry about sometimes happens is you'll see something, but the full declaration or the full picture isn't always shown to you. And it might be because the storyteller is trying to create a certain narrative or trying to weave a certain story. That's not unusual in news or documentaries. It happens all of the time. But you can't really object to it. If you are someone who says it's not a fair depiction of what's going on, actually it was very fair. Yes, this doctor did say those things. Yes, he does have relations with these people. Also,
But they do
this
also
is what's
mention
happening.
that. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's a really it's sort of like it's a good equalizer. That is how things should be presented.
Sure, but
and if all of the coverage of the war, all of the conflict was covered in that manner, I don't think that there would be this vacuum created where speculation could grow about particular broadcasters or publications' biases.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
There's the thing that I kept being reminded of when I was watching it was this is just the medical staff. Number one, that the two things that I wanted to say, that it was just so harrowing that it was, yes, they were pointing out at several junctures that so-and-so's brother or this person has posted favorably towards Hamas or whatever. But in the very early stages of the documentary, it said medical staff are protected under international law from from oppressive armies. There is a protection on medical staff, doctors, surgeons, pediatricians, whatever they might be. And their political views are also protected. So you cannot, as an occupying force or as an army attacking an area, say, well, this person posted on Facebook something favorable towards Hamas in the days after October 7th. So that means we need to arrest them and we need to torture them and then send them back. And then there was also the thing, a couple of doctors said that they were told openly when they were kidnapped and brought to Israel to the military prison that the reason why they were being taken was because there is potential that they treated hostages at some point, which is also not a reason to arrest a doctor, that they had a patient at one point. And all of these things were just adding up, but I think it was right to point out, and you were right to point out, that they do say at several points when they're talking to specific characters that this is something that they did in the months after October 7th. This is who they're related to or whatever it might be. But they remind you at the beginning that they're protected under international law to have a political view. And that should have no bearing on how they're treated by an occupying force. So it's still the IDF they are still committing war crimes, and there's no real retribution by just taking a doctor and torturing a doctor because they're pro-Hamas,
I thought the Israeli doctor whistleblower, that was a very frightening part, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was very frightening.
Yeah.
Talking about the sort of encouraging the torture. That was really frightening.
Oh, the whole thing of you're a terrorist, but I'm a doctor. and like, what was it that like peeling scabs off? I can't remember the doctor's name, but it was like they were peeling scabs off his legs and saying like doctors were torturing the
There was an
inmates as
operation.
much as
There was an operation where no anaesthetic was,
yeah
as far as he knew, was given to the patient, and he was screaming
yeah
in agony. He said it was a very particularly painful and invasive procedure, and they just did it.
mm,
And then you've got that scene. Sorry, just as like a warning here, if you are of the queasy persuasion, you're not going to like this.
yeah
I'm going to talk about sexual assault, so if you don't like that, you've got to turn it off. There's a particularly harrowing account of prisoners, a stick being used
mhm,
to create internal anal bleeds.
yeah
It is, and then they cut to what looks like it's politicians discussing. It kind of looks
it's
like
like
a
a
sort of
select
select
committee
committee
of some
set up.
sort.
Yeah. And there is a politician there advocating, saying, well, what's the problem with doing that?
Mhm.
They are
And also the
terrorists.
protests outside the prison calling for when it's found out who the soldiers are that are raping the inmates and they're arrested and tried, there are protests outside the courts and outside the prisons demanding the release of those people because they should be allowed to do that. Like, the entire system that operates around it is just obscene. But again, these are things that have been reported for months on end, you know? So to go back to the kind of the perception of partiality thing, I guess what was most affronting was probably the same for you, is just seeing an hour of video footage
Back
of
to
the
back to
things
back.
nonstop, whereas you've read that these things have been happening.
Well, normally also on social media, you might be like,
You get
oh,
a
here's
cat
a
video
really,
after it.
really harrowing, thing.
Yeah.
And then, oh, by the way, here's someone falling down the stairs. Oh, thank God for that.
Yeah,
Like, do you know what I
A
mean?
little bit of dopamine afterwards.
Yeah.
But the harrowing part of it is genuinely the visuals, because everything else, as you're watching it, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on since October 23, it's nothing new. It's just constant. You're being bombarded for an hour with what has happened and what is happening. And so when it comes to this before we've even published it, this is the BBC talking, before we've even published it, we are perceiving backlash for showing you things that you already know are happening. That it's still the two things don't line up very well for me.
But they need to have a more transparent system with this then, because it needs to be, I really do. Perhaps I would actually say it justifies being called in front of a select committee to ask, what are the parameters? What was the decision here?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, I would be interested if there is a very clear reason of why it doesn't align. But at the end of the day, look, you know, as journalists, you're not allowed to go into the area. You cannot get first-hand footage or first-hand accounts that you can verify as a publisher. The argument you would put back to, you know, if we're thinking about impartiality and both sidesing it, is you'd put back to Israel, well, what can the Israeli government, well, what do you want us to do? How can we correctly represent the IDF?
Here are all the allegations.
If the only if the only way that we know it is through the lens of the IDF or through the lens of people on the ground in Gaza. You know, even at the end, you're looking at the widely refuted Hamas health ministry figures for how many people have died. And when I say they're widely refuted, I mean, like, there are a lot of people in this country who say that those figures are not correct because they're supplied by Hamas, and Hamas are trying to bolster the figures, right? And they're trying to bulk up the figures. That's the right word. And you say, okay, well, that's fine, but the only monitoring that you can correctly do is through the Hamas health ministry.
Yeah.
That is the act.
Allow the UN
have.
in to do some evaluating.
Do you know what I'm saying? You know, there was a really weird bit as well at the end, I thought, and I probably already knew this, but there's a number of hostages left. I think it's 40 hostages or something like that. And they said that 50 hostages, I can't remember, but the IDF say there's 22 they think are still alive. And you go, how do you know that? How do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, and if you do know that,
does that mean that
but then you could be supplying these figures for how many people have been killed in Gaza? Because if you're able to if you know that little minutiae detail, you must have. There are flights flying over Gaza that are widely suspected to be gathering intelligence. I don't know that. I'm not privy to what those RAF planes are doing. But in gathering the intelligence, surely you can come up with a rough estimate, a rough number that at least can somewhat validate the Hamas Health Ministry figures.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, you'd wonder why they don't want, like there's Al-Shifa Hospital was one of the first ones that they were claiming had the Hamas tunnels underneath it, which was why they needed to evacuate it.
They wouldn't let any independent inquiry.
They wouldn't let anyone in. Yeah. So it's still claimed that there's Hamas tunnels there, but they're not letting the UN in, and they're not letting independent or even things like the Red Crescent or the Red Cross. The way that their treatment is portrayed in the documentary as well is, I mean, again, you know it because you've seen it, you've watched it, and you've read it over the last however many years. But to then see, like the documentary opens with a convoy of Red Crescent vehicles being attacked by the IDF, and it just continues from there. On also the kind of the way there's like this reluctance to allow international bodies in to verify anything that the IDF are claiming.
Or the Hamas are claiming.
Or the Hamas are claiming.
So there's this sort of cloud of obfuscation around everything. It's like, well, you've got to take the figures that are given to you.
Yeah. But again, I mentioned earlier that this entire documentary is just about the medical workers and their families. But one of the bigger stories over the last couple of weeks and months has been the systematic attacks on Palestinians getting food aid at collection points. And last week, Haaretz came out with the article, and it was another IDF whistleblower saying that the seniors in the IDF are actually encouraging them to open fire on people in these scenarios because it's a highly concentrated amount of people. I assume the reasoning behind it in a military strategy point of view is you are more likely to kill more people in this concentrated area than to have to go and look for them.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't want to. Jesus. Let me just talk about the hospitals for a minute, because there was a point I wanted to. You touched on something. The UN report that they highlight that talks about, because basically in this documentary they're going through each hospital and of the destruction. They're following the doctors on their journey between hospitals because they have to keep moving. And what they say in this UN report that came out, it would have been last year, wasn't it? End 2024.
Yeah.
They think they say that the strategy that the IDF take is the army will strike the building and then besiege the hospital, preventing access and blocking supplies. That's sort of step one. Then it will raid the hospital. Then it will detain medical staff and patients. Then it will force anyone remaining to leave. Then Israeli troops will withdraw, effectively leaving the hospital non-functional. So that's their strategy, is what the UN say, to making because you look at the Al-Shifa hospital, which was the biggest hospital, and it really goes into the detail at the beginning of that siege, is that what you would call it?
Yeah.
Of the hospital and the destruction. And it was like, day by day, they're doing things like, they'd first strike the hospital, then they're arresting people, then you see them go after the power supplies. You've got surgeons in there operating without any electricity, without any water. It's horrific. And then those doctors will move on to the next hospital, and then it happens again and again and again. And then you've got that one doctor who managed to get out, and he got out because he got to a point, kept moving, and he just said, "I've got to get out of here." Dr. Mugrabe, his name was, and he just took off his scrubs. He said it was the first time he took off his scrubs.
That's right. Yeah, he took off his scrubs to get his family out of the hospital.
Yeah,
Yeah.
out of the checkpoint.
Uh-huh.
And he said he couldn't believe it when they let him out. He said it's because he wasn't wearing scrubs.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, wearing his scrubs is something for the IDF to say, no, this person is a danger. We need to do something about this.
But the thing is, I think this is the danger in the reporting, because again, like I've said it multiple times, you said it multiple times. If you're not there, you can't verify any of this. And I think that's what's worrying about the IDF. They showed the video that the IDF released of the modelling of what they think it looks like under the Al Shifa hospital. All of these sort of, I guess they're kind of like war rooms. They're like, like where Hamas are
It was like
hiding and plotting.
Bin
and
Laden's caves. It looked like the
Saddam's?
exact same thing. No, the Bin Laden cave.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
Because
Saddam, of
Saddam's
course.
was just like a thing with a fan behind
Yeah,
it,
that's
wasn't
true,
it?
isn't it? Yeah.
Far less complex.
I bet it was really moist down there. Anyway, they, at the time about the Al Shifa hospital, see, look, we don't really cover this because, again, firstly, we're not foreign correspondents, and secondly, even if we were, we wouldn't be allowed in. Like the information that we give you on other podcasts is backed up by like people in Westminster. When I just ask them, directly, I can't ask people.
Yeah.
But if I was editing a major news broadcast, I would be really nervous about how you would word what the IDF claimed about the Al Shifa hospital, because you had nothing to verify that.
Yeah.
On the other side of that, you've got nothing to verify that there aren't. It's like Schrodinger's Shifa hospital. It's so ridiculous because it's like, but if you're going to make a claim as big and substantial as there are Hamas tunnels underneath this hospital, and
But
so
we're
we
not
have
gonna
to
let you see
potentially
them.
commit a war crime in order to because it's not a war crime because there are terrorists underneath it, the enemy is underneath.
You
Surely there
evacuate the
has to be
hospital.
some basis for that. There has to be some on paper basis.
Yeah. There needs to be a point where you just say, okay, you're not letting me see, you're lying. Like, we're nearly 2 years in now, and this is only the latest thing. There was in 2022, there was another, 21, there was another siege of Gaza. Sieges of the West Bank have been happening consistently since the 60s, since the 40s. There has to come a point where you say, I don't believe you. You're not showing me. Therefore, it doesn't exist. You can't turn around and show like this 3D model of an underground city below a hospital, evacuate everyone from the hospital, then say, yeah, it's there. It's there. Okay, can the UN have a look at it? Nope, it's there. Nope.
Yeah.
Nobody else can see it. You can't just continue like that.
I don't know if you can continue to report it after that point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
After
On a
that,
journalistic perspective, there has to come a point where you say, I don't know if we can
run that
Yeah.
because, I mean, yeah.
The only thing that's giving the IDF any credence is that the media say the Israeli government, but they say the Hamas-run health ministry. And so the way that there's an officiality to Israeli government and there's a fear and terror around Hamas-run health ministry. And there's a skewing in that, that the Israeli government are
An
saying,
othering, maybe.
huh?
An othering.
Yeah. The Israeli government are saying that there's a town below this hospital. The Hamas-run health ministry's saying that they've killed everyone in the hospital. But we know what the Hamas-run health ministry is like. We know what the Israeli press spokespersons are like at this point as well. So you need to start. There needs to be some sort of consistency that I don't think is there, especially after watching this and then kind of thinking, I don't understand what was risky about airing this.
Yeah. Well, if you watch it,
give it a watch. It's well worth your time.
well, yeah, it's really.
You're not going to enjoy it, but it's well worth your
It'd be a
time.
bit weird if you did enjoy it. We'll chat about it on the Patreon.
Yeah, we will.
Be in
See
the
you
chat. I'm very interested in your thoughts. See you there.
there. Bye.